Thank you for being here with us tonight, and welcome to everyone. We're very happy to be here in Oxford. Just yesterday was the celebration of 25 years of Tibetan studies in Oxford, and it's lovely to see so many people from near and far all together today. And it's wonderful to have Charles Ramble, who was an important part of the history of Tibetan studies at the University of Oxford, here with us tonight. And thank you for those online who are joining us. Charles this evening will be giving what is the third talk in a series of talks which we've organized regarding the work of our founder of the Shangshung Institute UK, Choja Namkha Norbu, and his works. And as many of you probably know, Charles is an expert on the Bon religion who spent several decades studying and living in Bombo communities. And we're very happy and honored to have Charles with us tonight. The talk will last about an hour. If you have any questions, those of you online, you can write them in the chat or raise your hand. And of course, those of you in the room are welcome to ask us questions. And thank you, Charles, for being here with us.
Thanks very much indeed, Jamian, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Jamian said, I'm going to be talking about an aspect of the Bon religion which really takes its point of departure as something that was written by the founder of the Shangshung Institute. That's all okay?
Yeah.
Chogyal Namkha Norbu. So he wrote a book called Drung and this is a trio that comes up quite a lot in Tibetan literature. We're going to be looking at some excerpts of these three terms. And the identity of the Drung and the Bön are relatively well known, but the Deu have remained mysterious until relatively recent times. So I'm going to tell you who I think the Deu were in this evening's lecture. So this is the famous book, Drung Deu and Bön, one of several that were written by Chogyal Namkha Norbu, translated from the Tibetan by Adriano Clemente, I think. Yep. So he starts off by, at least in the relevant section, by giving some citations that include the terms Drung and Deu. So I should point out that I've rather mixed up the transcription of Tibetan here. I wasn't quite sure who the audience were going to be, so in certain cases you're going to find this rather awkward system of transliteration called Wiley that doesn't really correspond to the way in which Tibetan terms are pronounced. But in other cases I've used a phonetic form. But not to worry, I'll explain what it is as we go along. So this is an excerpt from a famous 14th century religious history called The Mirror That Illuminates the Royal Genealogies, the Gyalrab Selwe Melong, where it says that in the old kingdom, that is to say before Buddhism came to Tibet, politics was based on the Drung and Deu. And there's no explanation of what these two terms mean. Another excerpt, also from the 14th century, the famous Red Annals, talking about an early Tibetan myth prior to the establishment of the Tibetan Empire in the time of the ninth king. The ninth king is assassinated by his horsekeeper, somebody called Longam Tadzi, and then the true heir to the throne, Ruleke, defeats the usurper. So Ruleke defeated Longam, and during the time of Ruleke and Pudegungyal, who was the heir apparent, the Drung and the Deu came. That is to say, came to central Tibet. From where? Doesn't say. And again, in a later account, these are the annals of the 5th Dalai Lama from the 17th century. So again, the time of the ninth king. During the reign of Digum Tsempo, this is the first king to have left his body on earth. All the kings prior to him ascended to heaven. Sorry, 8th king, not the 9th king. There arrived the Bön of the funerary rites of the Shen priests of Shangshung and Drusha. These are areas to the west of the Tibetan plateau. During his reign, Chingwatatse fortress was built, and the Drung, Deu, and the great Shempo of the burn of the sky came. For 27 generations of kings, the polity was protected by the Drung, the Deu, and the burn. And another quotation here. This is one that's quite often cited. The other three are less well known. But this is a famous account by a 16th century scholar called the Feast of Scholars. And he is rather supportive and apologetic about the pre-Buddhist tradition of Tibet, unlike many scholars that tend to knock the religion that was present in Tibet prior to the arrival of Buddhism. He supports it. He says, well, the people couldn't know better because Buddhism hadn't arrived. But the indigenous religion was nevertheless important in the sense that it trained the intellects of the Tibetan for the arrival of the true Buddhist Dharma. So to herald the Abhidharma scriptures, the Deu were practiced. Queries such as, what has a head that grows and gets fatter for a tussock of grass? And other things inscribed on the funerary mounds in Lhasa about the Drung, the Deu, and the burn. They broadened the Tibetan's horizons somewhat. And then his commentary to this is, from this passage we can glean that the Deu was mainly identified with riddles, but the expression and other leads us to suppose that other meanings may have been embraced. So Deu is usually translated as riddles. Drung refers to the bards. These were the bards who sang the great epic, the Epic of Gesa, at least in later times. The Epic of Gesa being the longest epic in the world, running to something like 1 million verses. And it's still a living tradition. It's still sung by bards across Tibet. And the Bon, in later history, the term Bon refers to a religion, that is to say the indigenous religion of Tibet, prior to the arrival of Buddhism. But in the earlier sources, it actually designates a class of priest, the Bon. Okay, so when we have this trio, we have the Drung, who are the bards, the Bon, who are a class of priests, and the Deu, who remain mysterious. In certain contexts, as we see here, it seems to refer to a riddle of some sort, as we see here. But from the earlier citations that I showed you, it appears to refer to something in the same category as Drung and Burn, that is to say, a practitioner of some sort. Right? So it has multiple meanings. So in his chapter on Deu, these are the different sections that Namkhai Nobu has to discuss the possible meanings of Deu. On the one hand, they're synonymous with Kek, which means riddles. And there are lots of riddles like these. For example, one that's often cited is it has stripes and yet it is not a tiger. It sucks and yet it is not a baby cow. It is not a calf. And the answer is a bee. So, that sort of thing. Tibet is full of this kind of thing. Then there's the term De as it features in the names of Tibetan kings. A lot of kings had the title De in their name, or the diminutive form Deu. And then he discusses a form of pebble divination called Deutul. And then he discusses Deu as a type of teaching, as he says, a means to transmit deep knowledge. And then finally, Deu as a means to communicate secret messages. And in this context, it's rather similar to the sense of riddles, because it's a hidden meaning. I won't go into the details of these, but anyway, this is the range of things that the term Deu is identified as having in the literature. Then in a footnote, Namkhai Nobu has this. So on page 204 of his book, this is not yet in the footnotes. He refers also belonging to the category of those who deserve to become the target of wrathful action are disciples who break their vows, practitioners who defy the protective deities. And this is the term from which it's translated, Leu Hla Lokken. Leu Hla Lokken. And then in the footnote, we see the definition of Leu Hla Lokken. He says, Leu or Leu can be interpreted in the sense of a practitioner, And the whole expression could also intend a practitioner who, after receiving the instructions on the rites of destruction, puts the power into action, but combining it with unsuitable deities. And then we have a reference within this footnote to somebody whom Chogyal Namkhai Nobu consulted, that is to say Lopem Tenzin Namdak, about whom we were just talking, who was a great Bonpo master who passed away earlier this year, who says that the expression Leui La was used to denote deities such as the Goe Langa, that is the 5 enveloping gods, and the Kyope Lagu, the 9 protective gods, intimately connected with the fortune and prosperity of the individual and the community. Okay, so here we see the term Liu apparently meaning Leui La, the gods of the Liu, are a category of divinities. Now, the whole subject of the Liu was not really touched for a very long time, until Chogyal Namkhai Nobu was one of the last people to write about it. And a survey of the literature on Liu was published recently, and when I say recently, I mean in the last couple of weeks, by my friend and colleague Daniel Berunsky. This is the title, An Enigma of the Tibetan Liu, Ritual Law, and Divinities of the Fetus. So this is an article that was published in a rather obscure volume that appeared in China. I was able to obtain a copy. I'm going to try to republish it somewhere where it's more accessible, because it's quite an important article. Now, he discusses the literature on Liu, and he starts with Rolf Stein, who was a French Tibetologist and really the greatest authority on the Tibetan epic, which he published in 1959. So he says, Stein refers to the Buddhist historiographical chronicles mentioning the way of ruling in ancient, he says ancient Peu in the article. Originally in his article he told me he had Tibet, but the Chinese now object to the use of the term Tibet, and they wanted him to use the word Xizang, which is the Chinese term for it. He refused, and they compromised by his using the Tibetan word for Tibet, which is Bod. So anyway, by way of ruling in ancient Tibet by means of stories, Drung, so these are the bardic epics, riddles, Deu, and Bön. Being primarily interested in reference to the place of oral narrations and the role of bards in Tibetan culture, of course he was interested in the Gesar epic, he points out certain inconsistencies with respect to the second of the terms mentioned as Deu. This term is mostly understood as riddle, but Daniel goes on. However, confusingly, there also appear rare cases scattered in the literature where instead of the expected Deu, another term written as Liu appears. This expression would normally mean chapter or division, but this is apparently not the case in such references. So these two terms which we find in Namkhai Nobu's book, Deu, and then later on Liu, perhaps they are the same term. And the research on the Liu, first of all by Stein, then by Chogyal Namkhai Nobu, was not touched again until 2005, where this remarkable individual, Ngunzin Ngawang Gyatso, published an article called The Hladak Liu, Ritual Specialists of the Blackwater Burn of the Phenomenal World in Southern Amdo, in Eastern Tibet. So this was an article that was published in Tibetan. It created quite a sensation at the time. And later on, I had the privilege of translating it into English, and this is the version you see here, which appeared in 2016. He wrote another article later on, which I also had the pleasure of translating, the Lungyig text of the Leu scriptures from the Penshu area in Amdo. So Leu, he suggested, is actually a category of priests who have been lost to history. And this is how we can understand the term. And it makes complete sense, because you have the Drung, who are the bards, the Bön, who are a class of priests, and the Deu, or Leu, who keep appearing in strange contexts. And what Ngawang Gyatso did was actually to find a living community of Leu priests. So this was a major achievement. And this is where they're located. So here we have a practically illegible map of eastern Tibet. So this is at the intersection of three provinces. So you have Qinghai province in the west, Gansu in the north, and Sichuan in the south. And it's really at the intersection of these three in the Minshan mountain range, and particularly around Teo, that you find these priests. And here we have Ngawang Gyatso himself to the left, with a monk friend, working with one of these elderly priests. Now this is a tradition that was almost obliterated during the Cultural Revolution, but a few of these priests survived. And here we are. Okay, sorry about that. This class of priests almost disappeared completely during the Cultural Revolution, when all religious institutions were persecuted. But a few of these elderly priests survived, and Ngawang Gyatso made it his mission to interview them and to find out as much as he possibly could about their traditions. Now it turns out that they are not only a class of practicing priests, but they also have a huge literary corpus which nobody knew anything about. And this is really what Ngawang Gyatso's most important discovery was. So here he is sitting with his monk friend and another aging Leu. Now who were these Leu? The interesting thing about this literature, I'm going to talk about it in just a moment, is that it's not standard Buddhism, it's not a standard Bon either. It seems to bear the closest resemblance to ritual texts of the imperial period that we find in the oldest collections of Tibetan texts, notably from the Silk Road in Dunhuang. So there are early ritual texts, and there seem to be continuities between those very early texts and what has turned up in the Minshan borderlands. Okay. So, if this really is a continuous tradition, a tradition that was obliterated in central Tibet during the persecution of the Bon religion after the introduction of Buddhism during the 8th century, how on earth did it get to the far east of Tibet? Now, according to the earliest accounts, this old form of Bon was present in central Tibet, but after the introduction of Buddhism, and after Buddhism was made the official religion of Tibet at the end of the 8th century under the reign of a king called Trisongdetsen, the practitioners of the Bon religion were given a hard choice. They could convert to Buddhism, or they could go into exile, or they could commit suicide. And the story is that some of them fled into exile. The other story is that these were the army chaplains of the Tibetan forces before the complete conversion of Tibet to Buddhism. So during the reign of the first emperor, Songtsen Gampo, Buddhism had been introduced in a rather nominal way, but the old religion was still practiced, and the army was pushing out the bounds of the empire at that time, to the far east, up to the Silk Road, west, even south as far as the Gangetic Plains. And Ngawang Gyatso suggests that these Leu priests in eastern Tibet may be the descendants of the army chaplains who accompanied the forces, and then after the demobilization of the army and the collapse of the empire, they were stranded there in eastern Tibet. And so they remained and perpetuated this old central Tibetan tradition in the very eastern limits of the Sino-Tibetan marches. That's a theory he's put forward. Another one is the one I just mentioned, is that these were refugees from religious persecution in the 8th century. And there is some curious circumstantial evidence for the second case, and it's a little complicated to explain it, but I'll see if I can do it. Now there is an early Bon history called the Drakpa Lingjak, that's the title at the top of the page, Drapa Lingdak. It's a 12th century religious history written from the perspective of the Bon religion, when the Bon religion was being persecuted by the Buddhist emperor. And there is this phrase, so therefore let the youth Namkha Yocha and the youth Drempa take one section of Bon scriptures and go to Yalung Sokha. Let the 4 scholars take one section of Bon and go to establish the doctrine at Dongo in the south. Then there's an asterisk, well, it's a footnote, and the footnote explains this term Dongor in the south. And there are 3 texts in question here, B, C, and D. And our authors, Pek Werner and Daniel Martin, say Dongo or Domjo is a corrupted form of Domjom, literally a box of bears or a bear box, a way of speaking about the southern lands otherwise called Mun. It means the sort of barbarous southern lands. We take it here to mean the area of Bhutan and the Monyul corridor to the east of Bhutan. So the important thing to retain from this is that these Bonpos fled with their texts, those who didn't commit suicide, those who didn't convert to Buddhism. They fled to an area called Dongjon. And here we have it, Dongjon. Now, one of the collections of manuscripts in facsimile form, it was actually the first one to be published in 2011, I'll come back to it later. It was compiled by an official called Druktar. He himself was Tibetan, but his Tibetan was really not all that good. He's really somebody who's based in the Chinese system. He was an administrator, very sympathetic character, and he actually kindly gave me a collection of these 30 volumes. And this is him in the white hat over here, looking through the manuscripts, and with one of the Leu priests to our left. And this is the cover of one of the volumes in the first 30-volume collection, which you see here. And the title of this is Dome, which means Eastern Tibet, or Ando actually. And then he says Datsang Yul Yinape. So collection of manuscripts from the area of Datsang. In fact, there is no such place as Datsang. So where did these texts come from? There's a mystery here. Now, as I say, his Tibetan wasn't very good, but he knew the Chinese name of this place, which was actually Dangchang, which he assumed represented the Tibetan name Datsang, but it doesn't actually. It represents the Tibetan name Dongchom. So is it possible that this place Dongchom, where we find these Liu priests practicing this ancient religion, is it possible that this Dongchom is the same as the Dongjom that we see in the early Bon sources as being the location to which the refugee priests fled with their texts? It's possible, nothing to prove it, but the name is very suspicious. Anyway, so this was a very important publication of facsimiles. The collection came with 2 DVDs with some video footage of the Liu priests performing the rituals, and I was very happy to receive these DVDs. They worked once and then stopped working, so that was the end of it. Fortunately, I was able to get visual evidence of the performance much later on. The interesting thing about these Lius, they're also similar. The texts and the appearance of the priests themselves is rather similar to the priests of another nearby tradition further south in Yunnan, the priests of the Nashi tribe, who are called the Dongba. And here you have one over here. You can see actually the dress is rather similar, and these are a couple of Nashi Dongbas who are rather similar in appearance to the Liu priests. Yeah. Is there a connection? Possibly. Both of them are certainly influenced by central Tibetan Burma. There are other peculiarities of they don't always wear this strange sort of feathered cowboy hat, very often they wear, and we will see some footage of this, they wear something called the dongrab, which is a strip of bear skin which they wear around their foreheads when they recite. So anyway, collections of these facsimiles started to appear. The first one was a 30-volume collection from 2011. Then there was a 60-volume collection from 2013, also by Drung. He compiled these. Then there was a 10-volume collection edited by Tseringthar and Gawan Gyatso, two actual scholars, not just administrators, scholars who really understood this literature. And then another collection in 100 volumes, which I haven't been able to obtain yet. I've obtained PDFs of 4 or 5 volumes, but certainly not all 100 volumes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in these texts now. First of all, it's not standard Tibetan. It's written in the Tibetan script, in one of the cursive forms of the Tibetan, well, strictly speaking not cursive, but a headless form of the Tibetan script, but with certain very distinctive features. So, first of all, for anybody who's familiar with Tibetan, I mean, this is a rather idiosyncratic style of writing, and some of the letters are actually quite difficult to read. And then one of the features is that it's full of abbreviated forms. Now, Tibetan loves abbreviated forms. You know, in the same way as medieval European manuscripts used a lot of abbreviations, so the Tibetans do. But the abbreviations here are not the standard ones. There are actually dictionaries of abbreviations. You know, we've collected more than 10,000 of them. But here we have some that are you can only get from context. So here is the first page of a ritual text devoted to the Sabdak, who are the lords of the earth. So these are the earth gods of Tibet. And here we see the term Sabdak in the title. I put a square box around it, so you can see it's 2 syllables. This is the Sa, and this is the BDAG over here, with a little separation between them. Throughout the text, this term, Sabdak, is abbreviated to a simple S followed by a stroke. And since this doesn't appear in any of the dictionaries, we have absolutely no idea what it was, and it's only from the context that we could infer that this was the abbreviation for this. Another abbreviation, another class of divinities, is a class of terrifying mountain gods called the Nyen. Yeah, G-N-Y-A-N. You can see the term written here, transliterated. This is abbreviated in several different ways. So sometimes it's written as Nyen with an NY under it, and then sometimes the letter 2, the number 2. And you have to infer that this refers not to the number, but actually to this class of divinities. So here we have the NY with a Y under it. That's actually, yeah, you know, for people who read Tibetan, this will mean more than for those who don't. But anyway, you get the idea that there is very peculiar schemes for abbreviating terms which the scribe didn't want to write out in full. I'll skip over that. Then we also have SMS texting conventions. You know, if you're probably under the age of 15 and you text a lot, you will use abbreviations like this. So instead of writing great in full, you will do GR and then the digit 8. This is exactly what they do in these texts. They will use numbers to represent syllables. So I'll give you a few examples of that. So here we have the number 9 followed by N. And the term for 9 in Tibetan is pronounced, written DGU, but pronounced Gu. And then with an N on the end, it becomes Gun, which means winter. So winter is systematically written as number 9, followed by N. Then another example, the number 4 is BZHI. Put an N after it, and you get the word for face, for instance. Okay, so these kinds of things are used throughout. Just 2 examples of many here. And then they have a curious system of numerals, which I've never seen anywhere else. So this is a text called Drung, and here you can see it abridged over here. That's the title. And then in the margin, next to it, you have the folio number. So this is folio number 4, this is folio number 5, this is a number, this is the word written out in full. But then we get these peculiar images over here, these peculiar glyphs. What are these? These are actually the local forms, and here again, unknown in standard Tibetan. They have their own numerical system for certain numbers. So the number 8, which would normally be written like this in Tibetan, is written like this. It's a vertical stroke with 3 lines across it. The numeral for 9 looks a little bit more like the Nepali 9, actually. And then the numeral for 10 is this strange unit. And once you get into the teens, then you always have this figure for 10, followed by the unit. So 18 is written like this, whereas in normal Tibetan it would be written like that. Okay? So this is very distinctive of this class of text. To the best of my knowledge, you don't find it anywhere else. Okay, so what is this religion? We don't really have a name for it. They don't have a name for themselves. The priests are called Leu. In the introduction to some of these edited volumes, the religion is referred to as Dome. Dome means of the past, ancient, or it's sometimes called Sipe Burn, the burn of the phenomenal world, meaning that it doesn't deal with transcendent divinities, but only divinities of the world. It's sometimes called Sipa Gyugi Burn, the burn of the domain of the phenomenal world, and then sometimes Chabnak Sipa Gyugi Burn, the burn religion of the Gyu, the region of the Sipa, the domain of Chabnak, black water. Okay, what is black water? Now, the Bon religion classifies the teachings of its founder into 9 vehicles or ways, hence the famous 9 ways of Bon. And the first 4 ways are referred to as the lower vehicles or the lower ways or the ways of cause. And the next 4, 5 to 8, are called the ways of result. And then there's a 9th one, which is supreme, that's the great perfection. So, although these are considered by followers of the Bon religion all to be teachings of their legendary founder, in fact, it looks very much as though 1 to 4 are derived from the indigenous religion of Tibet, and 5 to 8 come from Indian Buddhism. The Bonpos would not agree with me on that, but structurally this is how the organization of these 9 vehicles seems to look. There's another system for the classification of the teachings called the Goshizoma, the 4 portals and the treasury, 5 in all, in which you have 1 portal, which is the white water, then you have the black water, and then 3 others which don't concern us. This is the one that interests us, the black water. So what is black water? And it actually corresponds to the 1st, 2nd, and 4th ways of Bon, according to the 9-way system. And according to the Tibetologist David Snellgrove, a pioneer of research on Bon, he says it corresponds to ways of prediction, death rituals, magical rites of all kind, the original Bonpo material. Bonpo, by the way, is just an adjective of Bon. So this is what we have. So in the 9 ways, we have the way of prediction, the way of the visual world, and the way of existence. So it's these 3 vehicles that are subsumed within the teachings of the Leu manuscripts. Okay, so what kind of rituals do we have? There are a lot of rituals devoted to animals, interestingly, and one of these animals is the bat. The bat is very important. Why? Because the bat is regarded as a messenger between gods and humans. There are a lot of myths about the bat, why the bat was so important. So, for example, I can read you a little bit. The clever bat was caught in a net and presented to the wise king Kongtse, a creature of such great artistry, but at the sight of it, Kongtse was revolted. the various bat features of its body. On the inside, there are 5 different things to be known. Thus did Kongse extol it. The clever bat said, "Don't kill me, don't cut me. If you kill me, I'll be a grey corpse. If you don't kill me, there will be 5 recompenses. And my body has 5 fine qualities. Propitiate me, the clever bat. Propitiating me will have its benefits in time to come. If you don't propitiate the clever bat, or the wise bat, the sky and the earth will be turned upside down. The black-haired humans will fall ill, and the cattle will die. Rain will not fall from the sky, and the 6 kinds of grain will not grow." So the bat is the mediator, and the humans have had a falling out with the gods. So the gods are doing terrible things to the humans, but they can't communicate. The gods don't speak the language of the humans don't speak the language of the gods. But the bat speaks all languages. And so the humans perform this ritual to send the bat up to heaven to communicate to the gods, and the bat comes back down again with the message from the gods. So this is the way in which communication works. So the bat is called the timpa, the messenger between gods and humans. This is another bat ritual. The bats are also very important among the Dongba priests of the Nachi people. So here we have the wise bat riding on top of an eagle in the pictographic script of the Nachi. Then we have another ritual for summoning something called yang. Yang can't be translated into English. It's something like the propensity to good fortune or the quintessence of something. But whatever it is, you need to have it if you're going to prosper. You need it to make your livestock flourish, you need it for your crops to grow, and you need it for your good health. So it has to be collected in the course of a ritual. And periodically Tibetans will go up onto the roof, they will sing a song. So here you have somebody with an arrow, with a beribboned arrow in one hand and a leg of mutton in the other. And he uses the leg of mutton and the beribboned arrow to call the young from the 4 quarters and bring it down into his house. Then we have the ritual of soul recovery, also a very important ritual among the Tibetans. In Buddhism, of course, the soul doesn't feature very much, but in the indigenous Tibetan religion, as in the case of the shamanic religions of Mongolia and the Himalayas, the soul is important. It's something that you can lose, but you won't die if you lose it. It's not like the Christian soul. Soul is probably not even the right translation, but to avoid the overuse of indigenous terms, let's call it the soul. In any case, you're not very well without it, and it has to be brought back, otherwise sooner or later you will die. So again, it has to be called back. And this is a performance of a soul retrieving ritual, where you have 3 people walking around, one containing receptacles into which the soul will descend and then be consumed by the sick person who is downstairs. The second person with a yak tail to hook the soul when it comes in, and the third person with a frying pan and a stick to make a loud ringing noise, so that the soul, wherever it is, will hear that it's being called and come back to the house. Okay, so there we are. They're going around the house, the roof, calling the soul. Then we have an exorcistic ritual called the 3-headed black man. So this is an effigy of it, the 3-headed man of the black rituals. It's performed by Buddhists mainly of the Nyingmapa school, the old school, and also by followers of the Bon religion. And then another curious ritual, which I've never seen. It seems to be only practiced in the far east of Tibet, which is an area I don't know very well, called the Jadam, the bird perch. Why the bird perch? In a nutshell, a construction has to be made, a very elaborate construction, on which birds will come and settle. And these birds are actually manifestations of war gods. Okay, so this is for the propitiation of war gods. And then it's a rather violent text. So the birds, the war gods come down in the form of birds. So these are the classes of war gods. And this is one of these bird perches. You can see the Liu sitting down to the right-hand corner performing this ritual. There are war gods called Dala, Tukar, Werma, Shukgun, Changse, and several others. So these have to be summoned. And then at the end of the battle, this jadang is festooned with the body parts of the enemy who has been killed. Okay? So this is still performed in parts of eastern Tibet. They don't do the body parts bit as far as I'm aware, but they do raise these constructions. So here are a couple of lads going off to the local shrine with their own clan bird perch. And there they add it with these gigantic arrows, 20, 30 feet long, which are inserted here. This is very much a martial celebration. Women are not allowed. It's only the warrior group from the clans who go up here. And the bird perches are set up inside these cairns for the divinities. They have lots of different forms. Here's a very peculiar one, which is made all out of wool. They have a huge variety. My colleague and former student Valentina Punzi is working on this, and she's found some very interesting material. I'm going in a minute to show you a short video of a performance of a jadang ritual. So here is the jadang being carried to the cairn. And then we have this curious ritual where a member of the household, so this is done for the house, and here we have a rather small jadang, but one of the men of the house dresses up in a garment that's specially made for the occasion, resembling a brightly coloured bird, and he has to dance around the bird perch as if he's about to alight on it, because he's being summoned by the priest. So let's see if we can get this to work. Okay, there we are. It's actually a very long performance, but anyway, another class of rituals. One thing that you find recurring in these texts is this obsession with purity. Something you don't usually associate with, for example, tantric ritual. They're not very big on that. But here there's a ritual called sel, and there are different kinds of sel for the removal of very specific types of impurity, ritual pollution. So there's, we're not entirely sure what some of them mean, and they seem to mean different things in different areas. So, for example, there's me, which is the pollution from fratricide. Me, we're not sure what that means. Usually it means a curse. Tsok, also another form. In modern Tibetan it just means dirty, but here it has a very specific meaning. Yuk is the pollution from widowhood, and Nal, pollution from incest. But there are many others besides. For example, being born after the death of your father. That's a particular type of pollution, and an appropriate cell ritual, purification ritual, has to be performed. And this is, I'll show you a couple of clips of the Lius performing. So here you can see they have the bear strip, the bit of bear skin around the forehead. That's one of them. Then we have another Liu, just a short clip of him. An interesting thing about this, you see they have these, their handwritten texts, but they're not reading them, they're reciting them, they memorize them. Okay? So they have to memorize the text, but they also have to have the text in front of them. And the way they use the text is very distinctive. Normally, if you're a Tibetan monk or a lama, you'll have the text in front of you in sort of landscape format, and you'll turn the pages like this and read it. Now, it's the turning of the pages here has some kind of symbolic function, but as he reaches the end of each page, as he's reciting, he has to turn it, even though he's not actually reading it. And you'll see a little clip of that over here. You see, and he hasn't even got it in landscape format as if he can read it. It's the other way around. He can't possibly read it, but he knows where he is in the text, and he turns it over as he comes to the end of each page. So, these Leu have been suffering for quite a long time. The Bonpos, that is to say the followers of the monastic form of Bon, don't like them very much because they give the Bonpos a bad name. Why? Because they practice animal sacrifice. And this is something the followers of the so-called Drung, the monastic Bon religion, don't subscribe to. There is no animal sacrifice in the Drung. But because Buddhists tend to think, well, they're all Bon somehow, so even the monks must be doing animal sacrifice. So as a consequence of this, there's a motion to sanitize the literature of the Liu at various points in history. So in the 18th century, there was a certain Changcho Nampa Gyaltsen who composed a text called the Meteorite Wheel, the aim being to put an end to the practice of the Red Torah, that is to say, blood sacrifice, in a region called Bozo. And he persuaded the Liu priest to recite this text, the Kego Chopa, which is a canonical Bonpo work, the closing of the doors to rebirth in the lower realms. And they were obliged to do this. So a lot of the texts in which there were passages containing animal sacrifice have had those sections removed from them. So you suddenly see, there's a mention of an animal, then there are several folios missing, and then you come back to the text. Then somebody else called Yungdung Nima from a place called Nyaknyen, also in Balso, reduced the 4 volumes of Leo text to 2, simply by deleting all the sections dealing with animal sacrifice. Somebody else in the 19th century removed passages concerning chicken offerings. And then there was a personal vendetta. Somebody called Tenzin Wangyal took offense at certain disparaging remarks about the Chang branch of the Kam-Matsang clan that the text contained. And so he had the Leo texts from this area gathered up and burned. So there's been quite a loss of text. Nevertheless, a huge amount remains. So we're going to look very briefly at what's in these collections. So the 2011 volume has 30 volumes. A collection has 30 volumes, in which there are 639 titles. The 60-volume set has this many titles, the 10-volume set much smaller, and the 100-volume set probably around 1,200 titles. So this is a huge collection of ritual texts which has so far not been studied at all by anybody. So we're talking about 2,500 texts. So this is the 10-volume collection, which is the only one at which any attempt has been made towards editing it, because it's been produced by a couple of scholars, and they've basically transcribed it into the more familiar headed script, and they've expanded all the contractions. You can see the expansions down here in the footnotes. So it's actually much easier for people to read. I just spoke to him. I met him in Beijing literally a few days ago, and he said he's just produced another 10-volume collection. I said, oh, are you going to do the same transcription and expansion? And he says, no, it was too much work. So I can understand that. So he's simply producing the facsimiles, which is fine. So these are the contents. Okay, so that's a well-organized volume. But there was no index, there was no catalogue, there was no introduction. It was a completely chaotic collection of texts. And fortunately, 2 of my young Tibetan colleagues in Paris, Geshe Lundap Gatso and my PhD student Naljot Tseling, made a catalogue. They went through the whole thing, catalogued it. And these are the titles. Now, most of you can probably not read Tibetan, but even if you can, you'll see that the titles make absolutely no sense at all. They are so idiosyncratic that they're very, very difficult to understand. And as if that were not bad enough, these collections have been contaminated with canonical works. So this is the famous Closing the Door to Rebirth in the Lower Realms that was infiltrated into the indigenous collection. And a later volume, volume 8, from 6 to 17, all the folios are published the wrong way round, from right to left. And in another volume, volume 5, all the chapters in the volume run from right to left. Okay? So the thing is really a mess. But do we care? No. Why? Because it's actually so precious just to have the unedited facsimiles in front of us. And it means more work, but at least we're not dealing with somebody else's mistakes beforehand. Very often when Tibetan manuscripts come to light, they are published only in a transcribed form. And quite often, if it's a text like this, the typist will correct as he or she goes along, assuming that certain terms must be something else, but only because they are misunderstanding what the terms mean. So what we have is a sanitized text, which is actually a complete deformation of the original. So much better to have something incomprehensible and at least original. Okay, we'll just go through these. So some of them are in quite bad condition. So anyway, just to wind up, why on earth were these published? We have this huge amount of literature. The first collection, I was told, cost 6 million yuan to publish, which is around 700,000 pounds. To make a publication of texts which probably nobody will even read. And the 100-volume collection cost something like 20 million, which would be of the order of, let's say, 2 million pounds, something like that. So why on earth were they published? This is the question. They're published because it's possible to get support for the publication. It's actually a money-making scheme. And why is it permitted? It's because of something called the confidence doctrine, which was originally formulated by the former premier, Hu Jintao, in 2012. He developed the confidence doctrine, the confidence of socialism, or the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics, the theory of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics. So this was essentially taking certain concepts and then indigenizing them for the Chinese communist system. And then the person to whom we are most grateful is Xi Jinping. He added a fourth confidence, culture of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And that means all Chinese culture. And Chinese culture, of course, includes Tibetan culture, especially when that Tibetan culture is not the Buddhism that was imported from India, but an indigenous tradition like the Sipe Bön, this pagan Bon tradition. And because it's regarded as an indigenous Chinese culture, in order to develop confidence in it, you can apply to the government to say, I would like to go out into the field and photograph 20,000 folios of indigenous manuscripts and publish them in a very expensive edition, and you'll get the money. So this is what people have been doing as a money-making scheme, going out, applying for funding, publishing these collections, which they don't understand at all. And it's the best thing in the world, because it just makes this stuff available. Otherwise it would be sitting in villages. Finally, these priests are starting to show their texts. And with this scheme around, they're not selling them to collectors and tourists who are passing through the villages. They're able to get money by simply letting them be photographed, and the photographer and the editors themselves are also making a lot of money on the back of this project. And we are benefiting massively in our knowledge of the indigenous culture of Tibet thanks to this scheme of the 4 confidences. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for a fantastic overview of the Dao and all the beautiful images. Does anybody here in the room have any questions for Charles? Or I could start with one. I saw 2 times arrows, one in the Eastern Tibetan village ritual with those huge arrows 30 foot tall, and then the other one in Mustan when the man was holding the lamb leg, was it, or something?
Yeah.
It looked like a lamb.
Yes.
And this arrow with ribbons. What are the origins of arrows? And one has more of a martial context, and one has perhaps a more long life context, I believe, in those images. Could you tell us about arrows?
Yes, arrows turn up in a lot of different contexts, and so you've got to be really clear about which particular ritual it is. Most commonly, the arrow turns up in company with the spindle, because the arrow is the symbol of the man and the spindle is the symbol of the woman. So very often in ritual effigies you'll see an arrow and a spindle representing both sexes. In other cases it represents good fortune, so you'll see it standing on the altar. It's a particular type of arrow which has ribbons of 5 different colors attached to the what they call it's always point downwards, and then the shaft, just below the fletching, the arrow, the ribbons will be attached around there. So sometimes the arrow is actually used as a kind of conduit for good fortune to come down. So there's, for example, another thing, rather like yang, but called pal, which has to be brought down from the sky. And then it's brought down and it has to land on the nock of the arrow, and then on the fletching, and then down the shaft, and then eventually into the arrowhead, and then into the house. So in certain contexts it's a conduit. In other cases, these gigantic arrows, that is usually representative of the clan god. It's an offering to the clan god. So it's very much context specific.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned that there's a little talk about purity, which, as I'm currently also working through some manuals on ordeals, that seems also to be a prerequisite for any kind of ordeals in legal practices. And there seems to be a connection, because you started us off in the imperial period. Whether you would think that any kind of like ordeals, if we want to trace any of these origins, would fit into that cosmos that you are now exploring?
Yeah, I mean, ordeals and oaths are the same thing, of course, and the ritual performance there. Usually, in the case of ordeals, the person who is being subjected to the ordeal has to be dressed in a particular way, usually with loose hair, very often naked. And very often, I think we even discussed this before, with a red copper pot sitting on his head. The significance of which I've never really understood, and quite often sitting on a naked yak skin. But I think they have to be purified before they undertake the ordeal. The purification can take different forms. Before any of the major Tibetan rituals, there's something called the expulsion of poison, the Drung, and this is a complex ritual which entails burning the poisonous aspect of precious things. Mm-hmm. So, for example, for silver, I think it's tin that has to be burned. For gold, it has to be brass, and then all these things have to be assembled, burnt, and then general purity is achieved. There's purification through smoke, of course, and I think that's probably the main one in the case of ordeals. And then also tsen, which is lustration with water. But then there's also purification with the blood of birds, and that's actually an arrow ritual. It's called something arrow. We found a text of it recently, but entails I think 9 or 13 different types of bird, and the blood has to be used for purification. Specifically, which ones are used in the case of ordeals, I'm not sure. I would imagine smoke and water. Those are the commonest ones.
But no milk?
I haven't seen milk.
Okay.
No. Milk very much as an offering to the Nagas,
Right.
but as purification, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something I'd like to talk about. Yeah.
Can you close your screen sharing? This is just close your stop the screen sharing. Yeah, perfect. And they see you. Yeah, sure.
Ulrike?
I was wondering whether you would see a connection between Leo Deo in the sense of
Between what,
priests.
sorry?
The Leo or Deo in the sense of priests and the Deo in the sense of riddles. Because in ritual texts you often have hidden meanings, you have secret names for certain objects and things like that. So I'm wondering whether you would make a connection between these, or whether in the Leo texts you find these elements of hidden, hidden meanings.
It's entirely possible, because the terms, the same term seems to be used for different things, and it could well be. I mean, yes, you do find riddle-like things. What you find quite a lot is puns. Play on word, and perhaps that's also could be considered a type of dew. But is there really a relationship between Leo as a priest, Leo as a riddle? It's possible, but honestly, I can't say at the moment. We're really in the early stages of this work. I mean, even the term meaning a priest is not entirely certain. Sometimes it seems to mean a patron. So, it means both priest and patron in different contexts, but I'm not sure which contexts. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the riddles that has to be solved. Yes.
It's again so similar to Vedic literature.
Sorry?
In the Veda,
Oh yes, yeah.
you have again very similar things. The gods love the secret, and therefore in ritual text you need secret names.
Yes.
And then you have competitions between priests who need this secret knowledge, and they can challenge each other on that. So I was
Yes, you see.
wondering whether you have similar things going on there.
No, it could well be. I'm really intrigued by that, because I suspect, without really being able to prove it, that there might be some distant Vedic connection which perhaps came in through Western Tibet. I mean, even in certain classes of priests, like the Aya, who are probably Arya, and who are performing, and they're obsessed with purity as well. Of course. So there are all these sneaky clues, and also the structure of the rituals, where you have the recitation of the myth before the performance of the ritual. Something definitely to be looked into. Yeah, but thanks for that.
You mentioned about this symbolic image of arrow and spindle for those rituals, the masculine and feminine aspect. But you also mentioned that most ritual specialists, they're men, and in some rituals they're not women allowed. So I'm just curious about your observation of this feminine aspect of those ancient rituals.
Yeah, sure. For war rituals, women are not allowed. Partly because it's a matter of war, but partly also because it's to do with the propitiation of clan gods, and clans are patrilineal. Yeah, so monks are also not allowed. Why? Because monks don't perpetuate anything, by definition. Yeah, so it's only the men, those who are susceptible of perpetuating the clan, that will take part in these rituals. No monks, no women. Actually, funny story. Once I wanted to witness one of these rituals for the propitiation of a local territorial god, and I went to the priest and I said, would it be all right if I took part in this? And he clearly didn't want me to take part, but he didn't really want to say no to me either. And he said, well, women and monks are not allowed. Okay, I get the message. I'm neither, but I know that I'm not welcome. So, yeah, but in certain other types of rituals, for example, spirit mediums, a lot of spirit mediums, the lama, they're women, lakama. And also in rituals for the propitiation of serpent spirits, the nagas. In Ladakh, for example, it's always the women who do that. So, it depends very much on the context. And among the Nasi, you have the priest called the Domba, but there's also a class of female priests called the Luma, I think. So yeah, it's very much a division of labor.
Thank you.
Can I ask another one? Penguin, is that the region Penguin or
Okay.
not?
Okay. Well, I asked Tenzin Nandak said no. It doesn't refer to the area. It's actually, and the same with Chapkar and Chabnak, Blackwater and Whitewater and Penyul. Samten Karmi is convinced that these are actual places, and I have to admit, so am I. I've been to Kongpo, which was the sort of heartland of the Bon religion, and there are two locations on opposite banks of the Brahmaputra river there, and one is called Whitewater and one is called Blackwater, simply because of the way the water looks as it swirls around the bend. Highly likely that these were local traditions of Bon that then gave their name, this toponym, to a class of rituals. And Penyul, in the Bashe, the Bashe is the Bashe or Washe. This is an 11th, 12th century text that talks about the debate which led to the suppression of Bon funerary cults and the adoption of Buddhism. When this debate was held, a lot of Bonpo practitioners, a lot of Bonpo priests came to Lhasa to take part in the debate. They said they came from Penyul, including the Ashen, a member of the Yangal clan. He came from Penyul or Pempo. So yeah, I mean, I think yes, it makes complete sense to me. Yeah. Daniel? Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned that one of your hypotheses is that there may have been a branch of stranded chaplains, which then instantly reminded me of the Kamalok, which sort of suffered a similar fortune. And this all then kind of feeds back into this rich history by the learned one called Deo. Has this ongoing research given you any more insights into this rather mysterious figure?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's the short answer. But it is very intriguing. Yeah, Deo Chojam, of course. Yeah. Is the term related? But De itself is, it's such a polysemous term. Does it mean the same thing there? It could be, even like the term Allah, which refers to a particular kind of priest, but it's also used as a term of respect. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the case of the kings, it seems to be a respectful term. But I'm hoping that sooner or later we might be able to have some clearer answers about that.
Charles, how big an area and how many of these priests are we talking about in general terms?
It's a remote area in the Minshan Mountains, and there are, I think we're talking about a dozen also, really very few. But there are similar traditions further south among a group called the Baima. In fact, that dancing priest I showed you, he's not actually of the Leo tradition. He's slightly further south from a group called the Baima, who practice this religion, and that's a community of 10,000 where the priests, incidentally, are not being suppressed. They are actually very much being encouraged by the local community as part of the local identity politics. So, there it seems to be doing quite well. But otherwise it's a very limited tradition. The older ones, in many cases, are not able to pass their what they know on to the younger generation, because the younger generation don't want to live in the villages. They're all going off to the cities. Exactly what you find in Mustang, of course. So it's small, and a few people are still doing it, but it looks very much as if it's on the way out, I would think. Yeah.
Just a general question. I was just wondering, you talked about suppression of Bon religion, and you mentioned the animal sacrifice as obviously not being transferable to Buddhism. Are there any aspects of Bon which obviously Buddhists found objectionable and therefore the cause of the suppression of Bon?
In some of the early literature, one of the things that the Buddhists object to is the Bonpo's reverence of sheep. That's one thing that is actually spelled out. Why? And that also is connected with the death cults. Because when a person died, animals were sacrificed to accompany that person in the afterlife. And the sheep was one of the main animals. There's something, a luk is a term for a sheep, but there's a kipluk, which is the psychopomp, the guide, the spirit guide for the soul of the dead. So, that was a kind of a bleak way of saying that, because the Bonpos like that animal, is because they do animal sacrifice and so on. So that's one thing that's singled out. They, of course, during the big debate in the Washe about which form of funeral offerings should be, funeral ceremony should be performed for the recently deceased emperor, and it's decided that Buddhist rituals should be performed. There again, they object to the huge amounts of offerings that went into the tomb with the king, and also the fact that a lot of animals were slaughtered. So it's the expense of the funeral rituals that was singled out, and also the killing of these animals. But apart from that, I think later on there are certain philosophical polemics about Don, but that's much later on, and it doesn't really turn up in the early stages. And of course, all this doesn't apply to the followers of the monastic Bon religion, because they certainly don't sacrifice animals.
Can I say something?
Oh, sorry, Mike. Hello. Yeah.
Oh, hello.
So I didn't recognise you.
No, I didn't recognise you. You mentioned the texts with the abbreviations.
Yes.
And that the second lot of texts have not been expanded.
Right.
Are they not input automatically, and can they not be then automatically expanded by machine?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Okay. Because I am the fortunate beneficiary of a European Research Council project grant to work precisely on that. And we now, thanks to the computer specialists on our project, have a way of reading, or created a model that can read pretty much any kind of ume, headless script, and transform it into a headed e-text, which is then searchable. And the model is now also capable of reading and expanding about 10,000 contracted forms. And these are very idiosyncratic contracted forms. So, we've been working on that for 2 years. Essentially what happens is that, you feed the manuscript into the machine, it comes out with a printout, which has then to be corrected and then fed back to it, and that's done 3 times. And we have a team of 10 monks in Kathmandu who are working on that to improve the performance. And now we're down to, I think, between 3 and 7% word error rate. So that's pretty good, actually. So this is the best model that exists at the moment for reading headless script. And you really need that, because when you have such a huge amount of literature, there are 200 volumes of this, and it's quite difficult. In order to be able to work on it, you really need to be able to shortlist everything. So you cannot search it if it's simply in paper form, and computerizing it is absolutely the way forward, yes.
We do have 3 questions coming on the chat. So the first one mentions that bats are very interesting, but perhaps it suggests that the idea of bats might be originating from outside of Tibet. And if that's so, what's the connection of the bats and their origin?
Okay, it's not just bats, it's monkeys and flying squirrels. And you don't find many of those in Tibet. So this is clearly coming from somewhere else. And if it's Tibet, then it's quite likely to be a part of Tibet that's perhaps in the southeast corner, or Kongpo, which is also in the southeast, or perhaps the Himalayan borderlands somewhere. Yeah, so this is definitely an influence from outside.
Okay, the second question is, why did they perform a soul retrieving ritual? Didn't they believe in reincarnation?
Okay, so what reincarnates in Buddhism and in Pön is not the soul. in different branches of Buddhism, different explanations have been given for what it is that incarnates. Among the Tibetans, there's a general consensus that it's what they call the Namshe, which is the consciousness. But there is also a soul. And the soul is not something that reincarnates, it's just part of the composition of the human. It actually exists in two different triads, combined with the mind and so on. But so this soul, it's like a kind of, not exactly the vital force, that's something else, because without the vital force you die. But this, what I'm calling the soul, can wander off, but it has to be brought back. Now, this being said, in the early death rituals, what survived the dead person was not the consciousness, it was the soul. And it was the soul that had to be guided not to reincarnation, because there was no reincarnation in the early Tibetan belief system. It had to be guided to a rather ill-defined afterlife by animal guides, animals like the sheep or the horse. And it also had to be protected from certain types of demons, which were soul killers. So you had to make sure that the soul killers didn't catch the soul or steal it away. And so there were very special categories of rituals that had to be performed to protect the soul of the deceased person. So in the early ritual, it was not consciousness, there was no reincarnation, it was the soul that was taken off to the next life. But with Buddhism and Drung Burn, it is the consciousness that goes on to a next life, but the soul is also there, but it doesn't survive death. Okay, so I hope that clarifies it. We're talking about two completely different belief systems here, which overlap at certain junctures.
Thank you. And the other question, which perhaps could be the last one, is this is coming from Oliver, and he's asking, who can continue this extraordinary work of research? So for example, remember you were involved with the Kalpa group. I don't know if that's ongoing. Of course, you're research students. If you could tell us current state of affairs of research into the topic.
Sure. Well, the Kalpa group was very generous for a long time in funding my own work on some of these more obscure rituals. And so we have a huge fund of recordings of rituals, and we were able to collect a huge amount of textual material. The website at the moment is, shall we say, it's becalmed, but so nothing has changed very much on the Kalpa site, but we're going to be migrating all that and a lot more to a new site related to this project that I just mentioned. The project, incidentally, is called Reconstructing the Pagan Religion of Tibet. It's called Pagan Tibet. And this is a 5-year project in which we have about 10 people working on aspects of natural language processing, digital humanities, and then also trying to make sense of some of these texts. So this work will continue at least for another 3 years. Then I hope we'll be able to pursue it in the future. At least this will put it on a solid footing, I hope. And we'll be able, I hope, to get funding for some of my younger colleagues to continue the work.
Thank you. And if we have any more last questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I wonder if there's some collaboration with the local universities, because in terms of language, it will make it much easier for us to understand it.
Sorry, what was the first part of your question?
I wonder if there are some collaborations with the local universities.
Yes.
Okay, and how popular it is locally for the students to study this in their own region.
Yeah, I have very close associations, informal associations with Nawan Gyatso, who is an extraordinarily generous person who made all his material available to us, and also Tsering Tar, who was the former professor of Tibetan at Beijing Minzu Dashui, Minzu University, Minorities University. So I work a lot with these two, and I would love very much to have formal cooperation with them. But at the present time, according to the present policy, Chinese policy, it's difficult to establish formal collaborations with Western universities. We did have that in the past. When I was at Oxford, we had, I think, 2 successive 3-year collaborations with the Tibetan Academy of Social Science in Lhasa, and that was very productive. And now I would very much like to do the same thing with a university in Beijing, or perhaps the Southwestern Minorities University. And I've actually expressed this wish to certain people during my recent visit to China, and I just hope very much that it could be possible. Because, you know, obviously they would be able to help us a great deal, but we can also help them with the kind of technology that I was just explaining to Mike. In other words, they have this material, we would be able to convert it all into a searchable form, give it back to them, and they would be able to use it. So we can do a lot in terms of collaboration, but it needs a different climate, unfortunately.
Okay, then I think on behalf of everybody here, we can thank you, Charles, for your wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And we keep going on with our lecture series, so please keep updated on our website. We're planning several more talks, and hope to invite you back for one, of course, Charles.
Always a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.